The alarm blared for the third time that morning. Michael Chen groaned and finally forced himself to roll out of bed. The springs of his one mattress creaked as he sat up, rubbing his tired eyes. Another day, another dollar, or more accurately, just enough dollars to keep the lights on. 7 missed calls. Michael muttered, squinting at his phone screen. All from bill collectors. He sighed and tossed the phone onto the unmade bed. They could wait, just like they'd waited yesterday and the day before. At 34, this wasn't where Michael had imagined he'd be. The small apartment was barely 500 square feet, with water stains on the ceiling and a kitchen so tiny he could touch both walls at once. A folding table served as both his dining area and desk. The only decoration was a framed photo of his parents, smiling on their last anniversary before the accident. "Morning, Mom and Dad," he said quietly, touching the frame as he passed by. 2 years had passed since the crash, but the paint still felt fresh. What hurt almost as much were the medical bills that followed, astronomical amounts that insurance barely touched. Michael grabbed a wrinkled shirt from the clean laundry pile he hadn't had time to fold. As an AIDS support technician at a local company, he needed to look somewhat presentable, even if nobody on the other end of the phone could see the holes in his socks. His refrigerator held a half-empty carton of milk, some eggs of questionable age, and a few slices of bread. Breakfast of champions, he joked to himself, making toast and washing it down with tap water. He couldn't afford to stop for coffee anymore. Outside, his 15-year-old Honda waited, its blue paint faded to a dull gray in spots. "Come on, buddy, not today," Michael pleaded, turning the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, and miraculously started on the third try. He patted the dashboard gratefully. The morning commute took him past coffee shops where people casually spent $5 on a single drink, past restaurants where his monthly food budget would cover just one nice dinner. He didn't resent them, he just wondered what that kind of freedom felt like. At work, Michael fixed other people's problems all day. "Have you tried turning it off and back on again?" He repeated for what felt like the 1,000th time that week. His supervisor had praised his patience yesterday. Patience was easy when you had no choice. During lunch, eaten at his desk to avoid the temptation of the cafe downstairs, Michael checked his bank account on his phone. The number stared back at him, $157.43. Just enough to last until next Friday's paycheck if he was careful. He'd been careful for so long now. His coworker Lou stopped by his desk. "We're going out for drinks after work. You should come." Michael forced a smile. "Thanks, but I've got plans." His plans involved looking through job listings that might pay better and figuring out which bill was most urgent. By 6 o'clock, his eyes burned from staring at screens all day. Overtime wasn't available this week, which meant no extra cash. As he walked to his car, Michael calculated and recalculated. Gas, $30. Groceries, $60. Phone bill due Monday, $45. That left $22.43 for emergencies. Please, no emergencies, he thought. The car made a concerning noise on the drive home that Michael pretended not to hear. One problem at a time. In his apartment, he heated up leftover pasta and sat at his folding table. The silence was broken only by the hum of the old refrigerator and the occasional footsteps from the apartment above. Sometimes the loneliness was worse than the financial stress. "Things will get better," he told his parents' photo, the same thing he'd been saying for 2 years. He just wasn't sure he believed it anymore. Michael set his alarm for the next morning and fell asleep with the calculator app still open on his phone, the numbers $157.43 glowing in the dark room. Friday had been brutal. What should have been an 8-hour shift had turned into 12 when the company's main server crashed right before closing time. Michael's back ached from crawling under desks and his head throbbed from staring at error codes all afternoon. "You're a lifesaver, Chen," his boss had said, clapping him on the shoulder. "The team would fall apart without you." The praise felt good, but praise didn't pay the bills. The clock on Michael's dashboard read 8:47 p.m. as he pulled into the convenience store parking lot. His stomach growled loudly, had skipped lunch to fix the server problem. The $40 he planned to withdraw would cover a hot meal tonight and maybe some decent groceries for the weekend. A luxury, but he felt he deserved it after today. The convenience store's lights cast a harsh glow over the ATM tucked beside the entrance. It was an older model, the kind banks were slowly phasing out across the city. The plastic casing had yellowed with age, and the screen had a spiderweb of scratches across one corner. "Just work, please just work," Michael mumbled, sliding his card into the machine. He'd had to drive to 3 different ATMs last month when his card wouldn't read properly. The machine hummed and displayed the welcome screen. Michael tapped in his PIN, 1458, his parents' anniversary date, and selected Withdrawal. The screen changed to show his available balance, $157.43. Michael pressed $40 and waited, and waited. The screen froze with a blinking cursor. No movement, no processing message. "Come on, not now," he groaned, looking around. The store clerk was busy with a customer, and no one else was nearby. The nearest working ATM was a 15-minute drive, and his gas tank was already hovering near empty. Michael pressed cancel once, then again. Nothing happened. He pressed enter, hoping it would push the transaction through. Still nothing. His frustration mounted with each passing second. "Fine, have it your way," he muttered, and began pressing random combinations of buttons, something that had worked on his office printer when it jammed. He pressed 4, then 7, then a rapid series of presses on enter, cancel, and the number pad. Suddenly, the screen went completely black. Michael's heart sank. Had he broken it? Would the bank somehow charge him for this? Just as he was about to give up and leave, the ATM made an unusual high-pitched beep he'd never heard before. The screen flickered back to life, but instead of the usual menu, it showed a series of code lines scrolling rapidly. COPSYS_OVERIDE, true, ACC_PR COTOCOL, REF/MT94/X, and UOT_FACTO, SIT. VAL 1 million, SUNFIRM, Y/N. Before Michael could make sense of any of it, the screen flickered again and returned to the standard ATM menu as if nothing had happened. "Weird," he whispered, half expecting the machine to shut down completely. Instead, it displayed "How much would you like to withdraw?" as normal. Michael pressed $40 again, and this time the machine responded immediately. It churned and whirred, then dispensed 2 crisp $20 bills. The receipt printed automatically. Michael glanced at it, saw the expected remaining balance of $117.43, and shoved it into his pocket without a second thought. Just another day in his always slightly broken life. "Thanks," he said sarcastically, patting the ATM as he might an old dog that finally decided to behave. On the drive home, Michael's thoughts were only of the hot meal waiting at the Chinese restaurant near his apartment. They knew him by name there, the guy who always ordered the $8.99 special and never splurged on extras. He had no idea that in those few random button presses, his entire life had just been rewritten. The ATM blinked quietly behind him, its internal systems silently processing changes that defied all banking logic and security protocols. By morning, Michael Chen would no longer be just another struggling-it guy living paycheck to paycheck. By morning, everything would change. Saturday mornings had a routine. Michael would wake up at 8, make a cup of instant coffee, and settle at his folding table to sort through bills. It was depressing, but better to face it early and get it over with. This particular Saturday started no differently. He yawned, shuffled to the kitchen in his old gray sweatpants, and flicked on the electric kettle that had been a gift from his parents years ago. The Chinese food from last night had been worth the splurge. He'd even saved half the fried rice for breakfast. "Let's see what we're working with," Michael muttered, opening his laptop. The screen flickered to life, showing his email inbox filled with payment reminders and limited time offers he couldn't afford. He navigated to his bank's website, typed in his username and password, and clicked login while taking a sip of coffee. The page loaded, and Michael choked mid-swallow, spraying coffee across the keyboard. "What the?" he whispered, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. Instead of his expected balance of $117.43, the screen showed $157,430,000. Michael blinked hard. He rubbed his eyes, certain he was still half asleep and seeing things. The number remained, taunting him with all those zeros. "This is a mistake," he said out loud, his voice sounding strange even to himself. He clicked the refresh button. The page reloaded. $157,430,000 still glowed on the screen. Michael's hands began to shake. He closed the browser completely, counted to 10, and opened it again. Logged in once more. Same result. "No way, no way," he repeated, pacing around the tiny apartment. "This isn't possible." He grabbed his phone and dialed the bank's automated system. After navigating through several menus and entering his account information, the robotic voice announced, "Your current available balance is $157,430,000.00." The phone slipped from Michael's fingers and clattered to the floor. His legs felt weak, and he sank onto the edge of his bed. His heart hammered so hard he could feel it in his throat. 1,000,000 times, he whispered, suddenly making the connection. The ATM multiplied my balance by 1,000,000 times. He remembered the strange code on the ATM screen last night. VAL 1,000,000. The coincidence was too perfect. Somehow, his random button presses had triggered something in the system. Michael's mind raced through possibilities. Was this real? Would the bank notice? How long did he have before they fixed it? Was it a crime to keep it? Could he go to jail? He walked to the window and looked out at the ordinary Saturday morning. People walking dogs, an old man collecting cans from recycling bins, kids riding bicycles. The world looked exactly the same, but everything had changed. Michael returned to his laptop and checked his transaction history. There it was, system adjustment, credit, $157,429,882.57. Timestamped 3:17 a.m. "This is insane," he whispered, running his hands through his hair. Completely insane. For a wild moment, he let himself imagine what he could do with that money: pay off his parents' medical debts, buy a real house, help other families drowning in healthcare costs, never worry about a broken-down car again. His phone buzzed with a text from his power company. "Your automatic payment of $73.42 will process on Monday." Such a small amount now, almost laughable. Michael shut his laptop suddenly, as if closing it could make the situation disappear. He needed to think clearly, and the endless zeros were making that impossible. He walked to the bathroom and splashed cold water on his face. The man in the mirror looked exactly the same tired eyes, same 2-day stubble, same worried expression. But now that man had $157 million in his checking account. "What do I do?" he asked his reflection. "What would you do?" The question hung in the steamy bathroom air, unanswered. 3 days passed in a blur. Michael called in sick to work on Monday, claiming food poisoning. He hadn't slept more than 2 hours at a stretch since Saturday morning. Dark circles framed his eyes, and his kitchen trash overflowed with empty microwave meal containers and energy drink cans. The money still sat in his account, untouched. He checked every hour, almost expecting it to vanish as mysteriously as it had appeared. But the balance remained $157,430,000. "I could just transfer a little," he whispered to himself around 2 a.m. on Tuesday, laptop glowing in his dark apartment. "Just enough to clear my debts." They'd never notice a few thousand missing from that much. But he knew better. Banks tracked every penny. They reconciled accounts constantly. This wasn't a movie where he could just walk away with millions and start a new life on some tropical island. Michael paced his tiny apartment, wearing a path in the already threadbare carpet. He hadn't told a soul. Who could he trust with information like this? His closest friend, Pat, would probably tell him to take the money and run. His sister would tell him to report it immediately. Neither option felt right. He opened his laptop for the 100th time and started researching bank errors. The stories he found weren't encouraging. A couple in Pennsylvania had spent money mistakenly deposited in their account and ended up with felony charges. A man in Texas had tried to keep $100,000 from an ATM malfunction and got 5 years in prison. But none of them reported it themselves, Michael reasoned aloud. They all tried to keep it and got caught. He looked at his parents' photo on the nightstand. What would you do? He asked them. His father had been the most honest man he ever known, returning extra change at stores, walking 3 blocks to give back a lost wallet. His mother had been practical but fair, teaching him that integrity mattered more than anything money could buy. Michael opened a new browser tab and navigated to the website of a luxury car dealership. He clicked through photos of sleek vehicles that cost more than he made in 3 years. Then he opened real estate listings for houses with ocean views and infinity pools. I could have all of this, he said, clicking through images of a life he'd never even dared to imagine. But each click felt increasingly hollow. Would he enjoy any of it, knowing it came from money that wasn't rightfully his? Would he spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, waiting for the inevitable knock on the door? At dawn on Tuesday, Michael made coffee and sat at his window, watching the sunrise. The world kept moving outside, people heading to jobs, buses following routes, dogs being walked. Normal life. The life he'd complained about but now suddenly missed. I need to protect myself, he said finally, making his decision. He dug out an old digital camera from a drawer and began taking photos of his computer screen showing the account balance, the transaction history, the timestamp of the system adjustment. Next, he found a small notebook and documented everything: the date and time of his ATM visit, the exact sequence of events, the strange code he'd seen on the screen. Michael wrote a detailed timeline of everything that had happened since Friday night. When he was done, he made copies of all the documents and stored them in a sealed envelope at the back of his closet. If I'm going to do the right thing, I need proof that I didn't steal anything, he told himself. He picked up his phone and took a deep breath. His finger hovered over the bank's customer service number. It was time to make the call that would change everything again. First National Bank Customer Service, this is Diane. How can I help you today? Michael gripped his phone tightly, his palms sweaty against the plastic case. Hi, I need to report an issue with my account, he said, his voice cracking slightly. A pretty serious issue. I'd be happy to help with that, sir. Can I have your account number and verify your identity? Michael recited his information, each number bringing him closer to a point of no return. The customer service rep's cheerful tone never wavered. Thank you, Mr. Chen. Now, what seems to be the problem with your account? Michael took a deep breath. There's been a mistake. A big one. My account is showing over $157 million, and it shouldn't be. The line went silent for a moment. I'm sorry, did you say million? Diane asked, her professional tone slipping for the first time. Yes, million, with an M. One moment please while I look into this. The hold music played for less than a minute before a new voice came on the line. Mr. Chen, this is Kevin Davis, Fraud Department Supervisor. I understand you're reporting an issue with your account. Michael explained everything: the ATM visit, the strange code, waking up to find millions in his account. Kevin listened silently, occasionally asking for clarification on specific details. Mr. Chen, I appreciate you reporting this, but frankly, what you're describing isn't possible in our system. There's no way an ATM malfunction could add that amount to your account. I know how it sounds, Michael said, but I have documentation, screenshots, everything. The money is definitely there. Please hold. This time, the wait stretched to 15 minutes. Michael paced his apartment, rehearsing explanations in his head, wondering if he should mention the specific ATM location again. When the line clicked back, a woman's voice came through. Mr. Chen, my name is Rita Patel, Head of Technical Operations. I need to ask you some very specific questions about what you saw on the ATM screen. The questions were detailed and technical, exactly what buttons he pressed, in what order, what the code had looked like, how long the screen had gone black. Michael answered as best he could, occasionally referring to his notes. Mr. Chen, this is highly unusual. We're going to need to escalate this matter. We'll be sending a security team to your location immediately. Please don't touch your computer or attempt any transactions until they arrive. Michael's stomach dropped. Security team? Am I in trouble? No, Mr. Chen. You've done nothing wrong. But this situation is unprecedented. We need to secure all possible evidence. Within 40 minutes, 3 people in suits arrived at his apartment. They introduced themselves as the bank's head of security, a forensic accountant, and a senior software engineer. Michael, still in his wrinkled t-shirt and sweatpants, felt embarrassed as he invited them into his tiny living space. For the next 2 hours, they interviewed him, examined his computer, and made countless phone calls. The software engineer spent most of the time muttering technical jargon into her phone. "We've confirmed it," she finally announced to her colleagues. The legacy testing protocol was somehow activated during Mr. Chen's transaction. It was designed to stress test accounts by applying multiplication factors during system upgrades. It was supposed to be removed from the code 5 years ago. The security head looked stunned. "You're telling me this actually happened?" The system actually credited his account with $157 million. Not just credited, it's real money, fully accessible. The protocol doesn't simulate funds. It moves them from the test account reserves. If Mr. Chen had withdrawn or transferred that money, it would have been valid. All three turned to look at Michael with new eyes. "Mr. Chen," the accountant said slowly, "do you realize that you could have taken that money? Most people would have." Michael shrugged. "It wasn't mine." The three exchanged glances. "We need to call the CEO," the security head said. "Right now." Michael sat awkwardly in the bank's executive conference room, feeling out of place in his hastily purchased button-down shirt and the only decent pants he owned. The mahogany table stretched longer than his entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the city skyline he'd only ever seen in photos. "Can I get you anything else, Mr. Chen?" "Water?" "Coffee?" asked the assistant who had shown him in. "No, thank you. I'm fine." His voice echoed slightly in the vast room. He'd been waiting for 20 minutes, though it felt like hours. Yesterday's events seemed like a dream. After the technical team had left his apartment, they'd asked him to come to the bank's headquarters downtown the following morning. No explanation, just a time and an address. The double doors opened, and 5 people walked in. Michael recognized the security head and software engineer from yesterday. The others were strangers, dressed in expensive suits that probably cost more than his monthly rent. "Mr. Chen, thank you for coming," said a tall man with silver hair, extending his hand. "I'm Robert Wilson, CEO of First National Bank." Michael stood quickly, nearly knocking over his chair. "Nice to meet you, sir." Everyone took seats around the table, with Robert at the head directly opposite Michael. The silence felt heavy until Robert spoke again. "Mr. Chen, I've been briefed on your situation. I've been with this bank for 32 years, and I've never seen anything like it." He leaned forward. "Do you know what would have happened if someone else had found themselves in your position?" Michael shook his head. "They would have taken the money," said a woman to Robert's right. "They would have transferred it, withdrawn it, spent it, and we might never have caught them in time." Robert nodded. "This wasn't just a small glitch, Mr. Chen. What you discovered was a critical vulnerability in our system. A security flaw that could have cost this institution billions if exploited maliciously or discovered by someone with criminal intent." The software engineer cleared her throat. "The testing protocol you triggered was meant to be removed years ago. It was designed when our systems were first built, before modern security standards. Once activated, it granted complete system access, no limits, no flags, no alerts. In other words," Robert continued, "you could have bankrupted us. You could have transferred that money to offshore accounts. You could have disappeared." Michael swallowed hard. "I never considered that." "Which is precisely why we're having this conversation," Robert said, smiling for the first time. "Your honesty saved this bank from what could have been a catastrophic breach." A folder slid across the table toward Michael. Inside was a letter on official bank stationery. "In recognition of your integrity and the service you've provided to First National Bank, we would like to offer you 3 things, Robert explained as Michael read the letter. "First, a position as deputy head of ATM security. Your background in it and your first-hand experience with this vulnerability make you uniquely qualified. The starting salary is triple what you're currently making." Michael looked up in shock. "I don't understand." "Second," Robert continued, "we're offering to clear all outstanding debts currently in your name, including the medical bills from your parents." Michael's vision blurred with sudden tears. He blinked them away quickly. "And third, a reward of $1.5 million. The room fell silent. Michael stared at the letter, reading the number over and over. I can't. You can and you should, the woman beside Robert said firmly. This isn't charity, Mr. Chen. It's compensation for preventing what could have been the largest security breach in banking history. We've already corrected the software error, the engineer added. But without you, we might never have found it until it was too late. Michael looked around the table at the faces watching him. This wasn't how life was supposed to work. People like him didn't get second chances like this. When can I start? He asked finally. Robert smiled. How does Monday sound? 1 year later, Michael's life looked nothing like before. The small, cramped apartment was now a distant memory. He had moved into a modest but beautiful 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood with a backyard where he could finally have those weekend barbecues he always dreamed about. Every morning, Michael woke up with purpose. As the new deputy head of ATM security at the bank, his workdays were filled with meaningful challenges. His co-workers respected him not just for his technical skills, but for his honest character. The CEO often brought up the Michael Chen incident during company meetings as an example of integrity. I never thought I'd be driving to work in a car that actually starts every time, Michael joked with his new friend Tom from the accounting department. His old 15-year clunker was replaced with a reliable mid-range sedan, nothing flashy but dependable and comfortable. The most fulfilling part of Michael's new life wasn't the comfortable house or reliable car. It was the Chen Family Medical Debt Foundation he had established with a significant portion of his reward money. Every Tuesday evening after work, Michael met with families drowning in medical bills after losing loved ones. My parents would have been here for me if they could, he told a tearful woman whose husband had recently passed away after a long illness. I can't bring your husband back, but I can help make sure you don't lose your home while grieving him. The foundation had already helped 27 families in its first year. Michael kept a simple corkboard in his home office with thank you cards pinned to it. On tough days, he would look at those cards and remember why every decision he made mattered. Local news had picked up his story first. Then national outlets followed. Michael turned down most interview requests, but agreed to a few that focused on the foundation rather than the money. During one such interview, the reporter asked, "Weren't you tempted to keep all that money?" Most people would have. Michael smiled and thought carefully before answering. Of course I was tempted. I had $157 million showing in my account. I could barely sleep for 3 days thinking about it, but that money wasn't mine. Taking it would have meant becoming someone I wouldn't recognize in the mirror. His old friends were surprised by how little the money had changed him. He still showed up for their monthly poker nights, still brought the same cheap beer, and still told the same bad jokes. The only difference was that now he could pick up the tab for pizza without checking his bank balance first. The bank executives had offered Michael a fancy title and corner office, but he had insisted on staying close to the technical teams where he felt most at home. I don't need the corner office, he told the CEO. I need to be where I can spot the next glitch before it happens. On weekends, Michael volunteered teaching basic computer skills at the community center. Many of his students were older folks trying to keep up with technology. My dad would have been your age now, he told one elderly gentleman who was frustrated with email. He would have struggled with this too. Let's figure it out together. Sometimes at night, Michael would sit on his back porch looking at the stars, thinking about how one random moment at an ATM had changed everything. He didn't believe in fate, but he did believe in making good choices even when no one was watching. Sometimes life gives you a test disguised as a gift, he told his sister during their weekly call. I'm just glad I passed. The random ATM error hadn't just transformed his bank account. It had given him the chance to become the person he always hoped he could be.